#True Story. The incident that changed everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Liberty's training grounds as Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her gear for what seemed like another routine day. At 26, she had already proven herself countless times in her 8 years of military service, but the whispers still followed her wherever she went. Some soldiers respected her skills, while others questioned whether a woman belonged in their ranks. Maria stood 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed barely 130 pounds. Her compact frame often led new recruits and visiting personnel to underestimate her capabilities. What they couldn't see was the result of years of intensive training in multiple martial arts disciplines, countless hours in the gym, and real combat experience from 3 overseas deployments. The base bustled with unusual activity that morning. A delegation of international military observers had arrived to witness joint training exercises. Representatives from 14 different countries walked alongside American officers, taking notes and asking questions about training methods and military protocols. Among them was Colonel Henrik Volkov, an imposing figure from a European military who had made several dismissive comments about female soldiers throughout the morning. Colonel Volkov stood 6 feet 3 inches tall with broad shoulders and hands the size of dinner plates. His reputation preceded him as both a decorated officer and someone who believed traditional military roles should remain unchanged. During the morning briefing, he had openly questioned the wisdom of allowing women in combat positions, arguing that physical limitations made them liabilities rather than assets. Maria's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, had worked with her for 3 years and knew her capabilities intimately. He watched the international delegation with growing irritation as several members made barely concealed remarks about the female soldiers present. Patterson had served in combat alongside Maria in Afghanistan and had witnessed her save lives under fire. He knew the visiting officers were about to receive an education. The training demonstration began with standard military protocols. Soldiers showcased marksmanship skills, tactical movements, and equipment proficiency. Maria participated in each demonstration, consistently outperforming many of her male counterparts. Her rifle scores exceeded expert level, her tactical knowledge impressed the observers, and her leadership during simulated missions drew praise from the American officers. However, Colonel Volkov remained skeptical. During a break in the formal presentations, he approached Lieutenant Colonel Patterson with a request that would soon become legendary throughout military circles. Volkov suggested a practical demonstration of hand-to-hand combat capabilities, specifically requesting to observe how female soldiers would handle close-quarter situations against larger opponents. Patterson initially declined the suggestion, knowing it could escalate into something problematic. Military demonstrations were carefully choreographed to showcase skills while maintaining safety protocols. Impromptu combat scenarios involving visiting dignitaries violated numerous regulations and could create diplomatic incidents. Maria overheard portions of the conversation as she cleaned her rifle nearby. Volkov's voice carried clearly across the small space as he expressed doubts about women's ability to defend themselves in real combat situations. His comments suggested that female soldiers would become burdens, requiring male soldiers to risk their lives for protection rather than contributing meaningfully to mission success. The word stung because Maria had heard similar sentiments throughout her career. She remembered her first deployment when male soldiers initially refused to accept her as an equal team member. Through consistent performance and unwavering dedication, she had earned their respect and friendship. Many of those same soldiers now considered her among the most reliable members of their unit. 314 troops had gathered in the main training area for the afternoon demonstrations. The crowd included active duty soldiers, visiting international observers, base personnel, and several senior officers evaluating training effectiveness. Word had spread about the morning's impressive displays, and curiosity about the afternoon sessions drew larger than expected attendance. Maria noticed increased attention focused on the female soldiers throughout the day. Camera crews documented various aspects of the training, and she caught several filmed interviews where questions centered on gender integration rather than military capabilities. The underlying message seemed clear that their presence remained controversial despite years of proven service. As afternoon shadows lengthened, the formal demonstration schedule neared completion. Soldiers began securing equipment and preparing for dismissal when Colonel Volkov approached Lieutenant Colonel Patterson again. This time, his request carried more insistence and drew attention from other international observers who seemed equally interested in challenging American military policies. Patterson found himself in a difficult position. Refusing the request might appear defensive or suggest American confidence was misplaced. However, agreeing to an impromptu demonstration risked numerous complications, including potential injuries, diplomatic problems, and violations of established safety protocols. Maria stepped forward and volunteered to participate in whatever demonstration Colonel Volkov had in mind. Her quiet confidence and direct manner impressed several observers, while clearly surprising others who had expected hesitation or reluctance. She understood the broader implications of the moment and recognized an opportunity to represent all female soldiers serving alongside their male counterparts. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson attempted to dissuade her from participating, knowing that any incident could reflect poorly on his command and potentially harm her career. Military politics often punish soldiers who drew unwanted attention, regardless of circumstances or outcomes. He preferred avoiding situations that might generate controversy or criticism from higher headquarters. However, Maria insisted that she could handle whatever challenge Colonel Volkov proposed. Her determination stemmed from years of proving herself repeatedly and frustration with continued questioning of female military capabilities. She had trained extensively in multiple combat disciplines specifically to excel in situations where physical confrontation might become necessary. The crowd sensed growing tension as word spread about the developing situation. Soldiers formed loose circles around the main participants while maintaining respectful distances. Camera crews repositioned equipment to capture whatever might unfold, and senior officers exchanged concerned glances while trying to maintain diplomatic protocols. Colonel Volkov outlined his proposal with clinical precision. He suggested a simple hand-to-hand combat demonstration where Maria would defend against an aggressive approach by a larger opponent. He volunteered to serve as that opponent, arguing that his size and experience would provide a realistic test of her defensive capabilities. The suggestion violated numerous safety regulations and diplomatic protocols. International visitors were specifically prohibited from participating in physical training exercises that might result in injuries or incidents. However, Volkov pressed the issue while other international observers expressed support for the demonstration. Maria accepted the challenge without hesitation. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the growing tension among American officers who recognized the potential for disaster. She had faced similar situations before and trusted her training to handle whatever developed. Years of martial arts practice had prepared her for confrontations against larger opponents. Patterson made one final attempt to redirect the situation towards safer alternatives. He suggested modified demonstrations using protective equipment or structured scenarios with predetermined outcomes. However, both Maria and Colonel Volkov expressed preference for authentic conditions that would provide meaningful results rather than choreographed presentations. The moment arrived when diplomacy gave way to inevitable confrontation. 314 pairs of eyes focused on two figures standing 20 feet apart in the center of Fort Liberty's main training area. Military careers, international relationships, and fundamental questions about gender roles in modern warfare suddenly depended on whatever happened next. Maria centered herself mentally as she had been trained to do before any high-stress situation. Her breathing slowed, her focus narrowed, and Years of combat experience activated instincts that had been refined through countless hours of practice and real-world application. She understood that this moment would define not only her own reputation, but potentially influence policies affecting thousands of female soldiers worldwide. Colonel Volkov approached with visible confidence, his substantial size advantage apparent to everyone present. And nearly a foot taller and probably 80 pounds heavier, he represented the type of physical challenge that critics argued made women unsuitable for combat roles. His expression suggested certainty about the demonstration's outcome. The training area fell silent except for the sound of boots on concrete as the two figures moved into position. Even the camera crews stopped adjusting their equipment, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Senior officers held their breath while enlisted soldiers watched with mixtures of anticipation and concern. What happened next would become the subject of military legend, international incident reports, and fundamental changes in how female combat capabilities were perceived throughout Allied military forces. The confrontation lasted mere seconds, but its impact would resonate through military establishments worldwide for years to come. The confrontation and its immediate aftermath. Colonel Volkov moved forward with the methodical precision of someone accustomed to physical intimidation working in his favor. His approach suggested years of relying on size and strength to overwhelm opponents, a strategy that had likely served him well throughout his military career. His movements telegraphed confidence in traditional combat methods where larger fighters typically dominated smaller ones. Maria remained motionless as he closed the distance between them. Her stillness was not passive waiting, but the focused calm of a predator calculating optimal timing and positioning. 8 years of military training, combined with extensive martial arts background, had taught her that movement without purpose telegraphed intentions and wasted energy that might prove crucial in decisive moments. The crowd of 314 military personnel watched with varying degrees of tension and anticipation. Many had witnessed Maria's shooting skills and tactical knowledge, but had never seen her in hand-to-hand combat situations. Even soldiers who served with her regularly were uncertain about how this confrontation might develop against such a substantial opponent. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson positioned himself to intervene if necessary, while hoping the situation would resolve without incident. His experience told him that successful outcomes from such scenarios were unlikely, regardless of individual capabilities involved. Military careers have been destroyed by far less dramatic events than international incidents involving visiting dignitaries. As Volkov reached striking distance, his demeanor shifted from methodical approach to aggressive action. His hands moved toward Maria with obvious intent to grab and control her through superior size and strength. The technique represented classic, overwhelming tactics that relied on physical advantages rather than refined skill or technique. What happened next defied expectations of virtually everyone present except Maria herself. Instead of retreating or attempting to evade his grasp, she moved directly toward him with explosive speed that caught Volkov completely unprepared. Her response transformed what he expected to be easy domination into something entirely different. Maria's training encompassed multiple martial arts disciplines, including Krav Maga, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and traditional boxing. However, her response drew primarily from Aikido principles that emphasized using an attacker's force and momentum against them rather than meeting strength with strength. The technique she employed required precise timing and flawless execution to succeed against larger opponents. As Volkov's hands reached for her, Maria stepped inside his attack pattern while simultaneously grabbing his extended right arm. Her movement placed her in the optimal position to leverage his forward momentum while avoiding his ability to establish secure grips with either hand. The positioning required split-second timing that demonstrated thousands of hours of practice and refinement. Her grip on his arm was not the desperate clutching of someone trying to avoid being overpowered. Instead, she established multiple contact points that allowed her to control both his arm's position and his body's balance. Her left hand secured his wrist while her right hand controlled his elbow, creating a leverage system that multiplied her strength advantage through mechanical principles. The actual technique she executed was a classic arm break, known in Aikido as Shihonage or four-direction throw, modified to emphasize joint destruction rather than simply redirecting an opponent. The movement required rotating Volkov's arm against its natural range of motion while applying sudden, focused pressure to the elbow joint's weakest structural point. Volkov's expression changed from confidence to confusion to alarm as he realized his attack had been completely neutralized. His size advantage became irrelevant once Maria established control of his arm and began applying leverage that his strength could not counter. Physics and proper technique overwhelmed raw power within seconds of initial contact. The sound of breaking bone echoed across the silent training area like a gunshot. Volkov's right arm snapped at the elbow with an audible crack that caused several observers to wince visibly. The break was complete, rendering his arm useless and causing immediate shock that prevented him from mounting any further offensive action. Maria released her grip and stepped back as Volkov collapsed to his knees, cradling his shattered arm against his chest. Her entire defensive sequence had lasted less than 3 seconds from initial contact to complete neutralization of the threat. The efficiency and decisiveness of her response stunned military personnel who had expected a prolonged struggle. The aftermath created chaos as military medical personnel rushed forward to assist the injured colonel, while senior officers tried to manage the diplomatic implications of what had just occurred. Camera crews captured every moment of the incident, ensuring that footage would soon reach military headquarters and international news organizations worldwide. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson immediately assumed control of the situation, directing medical treatment while attempting to minimize further complications. His primary concerns involved ensuring Volkov received proper medical care while preventing the incident from escalating into international conflict between allied military forces. Maria stood quietly to one side as medical teams worked on Volkov, her expression showing no satisfaction or remorse about the outcome. She had responded to a perceived threat using training that emphasized neutralizing opposition quickly and efficiently. The severity of Volkov's injury was an unfortunate consequence, but not something that could have been avoided given his aggressive approach. The medical team's initial assessment confirmed a complete fracture of both bones in Volkov's right forearm. The break required immediate surgical intervention to prevent permanent disability and would likely end his active military career. The injury's severity surprised everyone except Maria, who understood the devastating effectiveness of properly applied joint manipulation techniques. Senior officers from multiple countries converged on the scene as word of the incident spread throughout the base. International diplomatic protocols had been violated, a visiting dignitary had been seriously injured, and questions about responsibility needed immediate answers. The situation threatened to create lasting damage to military relationships between allied nations. However, several international observers who had witnessed the entire sequence began expressing different perspectives about what they had seen. Video footage clearly showed Volkov initiating aggressive contact, while Maria responded defensively to protect herself from attack. The legal and ethical implications strongly favored her actions as justified self-defense. Colonel Patricia Williams, the base's senior female officer, arrived at the scene and immediately began damage control efforts. Her priority involved protecting Maria from potential retaliation while ensuring proper documentation of events for official investigations that would inevitably follow. Military justice required thorough examination of incidents involving international personnel. The crowd of soldiers gradually dispersed as senior officers established security perimeters around the medical treatment area. However, word of what had transpired spread rapidly throughout the base community. By evening, Every military member stationed at Fort Liberty had heard multiple versions of the story, each emphasizing different aspects of the confrontation. Maria found herself escorted to the base commander's office for initial questioning about the incident. Colonel Robert Hayes, Fort Liberty's commanding officer, needed to understand exactly what had occurred before higher headquarters began demanding explanations. His approach emphasized gathering facts rather than assigning blame for diplomatic complications. During questioning, Maria provided clear, factual accounts of events leading to the confrontation and her defensive response to Volkov's attack. She emphasized that her actions were purely defensive and designed to neutralize what she perceived as an immediate physical threat. Her military training had prepared her to respond quickly to aggressive contact regardless of the source. Colonel Hayes recognized that Maria's response had been both appropriate and effective given the circumstances. However, he also understood that diplomatic considerations might override questions of technical correctness or legal justification. International relations often required sacrificing individual rights for broader political considerations. Meanwhile, Volkov underwent emergency surgery to repair his shattered arm. Military surgeons worked for several hours to reconstruct damaged bones and torn ligaments while trying to preserve as much function as possible. The prognosis remained uncertain, with significant possibility of permanent disability affecting his military career. International observers who had initially supported Volkov's demonstration began reassessing their positions as the full implications became clear. Several privately admitted that his approach had been unnecessarily aggressive and that Maria's response appeared entirely justified given the circumstances. However, public statements remained carefully neutral pending official investigations. The incident created immediate changes in base protocols regarding interactions between visiting personnel and active duty soldiers. Future demonstrations would require extensive safety briefings, protective equipment, and medical personnel standing by. The informal nature of what had transpired would not be permitted again under any circumstances. Media outlets began requesting interviews and information about the incident as news spread beyond military circles. Public interest focused on questions about female combat capabilities, military training effectiveness, and international military cooperation. The story touched on numerous controversial topics that generated strong opinions across political and social spectrums. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson found himself defending both Maria's actions and his own decisions that had allowed the confrontation to develop. His superiors questioned why proper safety protocols had not prevented the incident, while international partners expressed concern about American military procedures and diplomatic protocols. As evening approached, Maria remained in administrative custody pending completion of initial investigations. While not formally charged with any wrongdoing, her status reflected the seriousness of potential diplomatic complications rather than questions about her conduct. Military justice often imposed restrictions, while bureaucratic processes resolved complex situations. The day's events would soon trigger investigations by multiple agencies, international diplomatic consultations, and fundamental changes in military training protocols. However, the immediate aftermath focused on managing medical emergencies and preventing further escalation of international tensions that threatened broader military relationships. What had begun as a routine training demonstration had evolved into an incident with far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. The next phase would determine whether Maria's actions would be recognized as justified self-defense or blamed for creating international complications that damaged important military partnerships. #investigation, vindication, and lasting impact. The investigation into the incident began within hours of Colonel Volkov's injury, with multiple agencies examining different aspects of what had transpired. The Army Criminal Investigation Division opened a formal inquiry. International diplomatic channels activated review procedures, and media attention intensified as details emerged about the confrontation between the American sergeant and visiting European officer. Special Agent Jennifer Martinez led the military investigation with instructions to determine whether criminal charges were warranted against any participants. Her team interviewed dozens of witnesses, analyzed video footage from multiple angles, and consulted with martial arts experts to understand the technical aspects of Maria's defensive technique. The investigation's initial findings strongly supported Maria's version of events. Video evidence clearly showed Colonel Volkov initiating aggressive physical contact, while Maria responded with defensive techniques designed to neutralize an immediate threat. Medical experts confirmed that her response was proportionate to the attack she faced, despite the severity of resulting injuries. Dr. Michael Chun, a military physician with extensive martial arts background, provided expert testimony about the technique Maria had employed. His analysis confirmed that the arm break resulted from a legitimate defensive maneuver rather than excessive force intended to cause unnecessary harm. The injury's severity reflected proper execution of a standard technique rather than malicious intent. International diplomatic channels worked frantically to prevent the incident from damaging broader military relationships between allied countries. Ambassador Patricia Reynolds coordinated with European counterparts to emphasize that individual actions should not affect institutional cooperation that had developed over decades of successful partnership. However, Colonel Volkov's home country initially demanded formal charges against Maria, arguing that their officer had been assaulted during what should have been a peaceful demonstration. Their position ignored witness testimony and video evidence clearly showing their representative initiating aggressive contact that justified defensive response. Support for Maria emerged from unexpected sources as the investigation progressed. Several international observers who had been present during the confrontation provided statements confirming that Volkov's approach had been unnecessarily aggressive and that Maria's response appeared entirely appropriate given the circumstances she faced. Captain Sarah Mitchell, who had served with Maria in Afghanistan, provided testimony about her combat experience and proven reliability under fire. Her statement emphasized Maria's consistent professionalism and demonstrated courage in situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death for her fellow soldiers. The investigation also revealed that Colonel Volkov had a history of controversial statements about female military personnel and had been counseled previously about inappropriate behavior toward women serving in armed forces. This pattern suggested that his actions at Fort Liberty reflected deeper attitudes rather than isolated incidents. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson underwent separate questioning about his role in allowing the confrontation to develop. While not facing criminal charges, his career prospects dimmed as senior officers expressed concern about judgment that permitted potentially dangerous situations involving international visitors. Media coverage evolved from initial reports focusing on the dramatic confrontation to deeper analysis of issues surrounding gender integration in modern militaries. Maria's story became a symbol for broader debates about female combat capabilities and the challenges women faced in proving themselves worthy of equal treatment. Television interviews with military experts generally supported Maria's actions while emphasizing the exceptional nature of the situation. Retired generals and combat veterans praised her skill and restraint while noting that most soldiers, regardless of gender, would have struggled against an opponent of Volkov's size without similar training. The investigation's conclusion vindicated Maria completely while recommending changes in protocols governing international military exchanges. Special Agent Martinez's report stated that Sergeant Rodriguez had acted appropriately in defending herself against an unprovoked attack and that no criminal charges were warranted against her. Colonel Volkov faced a different outcome as his arm required multiple surgeries and extensive rehabilitation. The injury effectively ended his active military career and raised questions about his judgment in initiating physical confrontation with a trained combat soldier. His country quietly reassigned him to administrative duties pending medical retirement. International military relationships actually strengthened as a result of the incident's resolution. European partners expressed appreciation for the thorough investigation and fair treatment of all parties involved. Several countries requested training exchanges to learn American military techniques, specifically including hand-to-hand combat skills demonstrated during the confrontation. Maria returned to regular duties after being cleared of any wrongdoing, but her life had changed dramatically. She became an unofficial spokesperson for female military capabilities and received numerous speaking invitations from military academies, training facilities, and professional organizations interested in her experiences. The incident prompted comprehensive reviews of military training protocols at bases worldwide. New regulations required extensive safety briefings for international exchanges, mandatory protective equipment during physical demonstrations, and medical personnel present whenever combat techniques were displayed. Military academies incorporated the incident into leadership and ethics curricula, using it as a case study for examining decision-making under pressure, appropriate use of force, and managing complex situations involving multiple stakeholders with competing interests. Maria's technique became required learning for military police and security personnel after experts determined that her defensive method was ideal for situations where smaller defenders faced larger attackers. Training centers developed specific curricula based on video analysis of her defensive sequence. Colonel Hayes received commendation for his handling of the incident's aftermath despite initial criticism for allowing the confrontation to develop. His emphasis on factual investigation rather than political expedience was credited with preventing diplomatic damage while ensuring justice for all parties involved. The 314 military personnel who witnessed the confrontation became part of military folklore as the incident gained legendary status. Many later reported that watching Maria's defensive technique changed their perspectives about female combat capabilities and reduced skepticism about gender integration in combat roles. Documentary filmmakers produced a feature-length examination of the incident and its broader implications for military culture. The film interviewed participants, military experts, and social scientists to explore questions about gender roles, military effectiveness, and cultural change within traditionally male-dominated institutions. Maria's career flourished following the incident as her reputation for competence and professionalism spread throughout military circles. She received promotions ahead of typical timelines and was selected for advanced leadership training previously reserved for officers with extensive command experience. Training facilities worldwide requested Maria as an instructor for defensive tactics courses after her technique proved so effective against larger opponents. Her teaching emphasized mental preparation and precise execution rather than relying on physical strength that many students lacked. The incident influenced military recruitment strategies as evidence of female combat effectiveness helped counter arguments about physical limitations. Recruitment advertising began featuring women in combat roles more prominently, while emphasizing that military success depended on training, skill, and determination rather than traditional gender stereotypes. Research studies examined the incident's impact on military unit cohesion and effectiveness. Results indicated that mixed-gender units actually performed better after witnessing demonstrations of universal combat competence regardless of physical characteristics. Colonel Volkov eventually recovered partial use of his injured arm, but never returned to active military duty. He later admitted privately that his actions had been inappropriate and that Maria's response had been entirely justified given his aggressive approach during the confrontation. International military conferences began featuring panels on gender integration, with Maria frequently invited as a keynote speaker. Her presentations emphasized practical aspects of combat effectiveness while addressing concerns about unit cohesion and operational capabilities. Military historians placed the incident within broader context of social change within armed forces, comparing its significance to earlier milestones in racial integration and evolving military culture. The confrontation became a symbol of institutional transformation rather than isolated individual achievement. The Army promoted Maria to Sergeant First Class 2 years ahead of normal progression and selected her for officer candidate school despite her lack of college degree. Her demonstrated leadership and technical competence exceeded traditional qualification requirements. Fort Liberty installed a memorial plaque commemorating the incident and its significance for military culture. The inscription emphasized courage, competence, and commitment to excellence regardless of background or physical characteristics. The site became a popular destination for military visitors and leadership development programs. Years later, Maria reflected on how a few seconds of defensive action had changed her life and influenced military culture worldwide. She emphasized that her success resulted from extensive preparation and training rather than natural talent, encouraging other soldiers to develop similar capabilities through dedicated practice. The incident's legacy extended beyond individual careers or military policies to influence broader social conversations about gender roles and capabilities. Maria's story provided concrete evidence that competence and determination mattered more than traditional assumptions about physical limitations. Military training evolved to emphasize technical proficiency and mental preparation over raw physical strength following analysis of Maria's defensive technique. Combat effectiveness was redefined to include speed, precision, and tactical knowledge rather than focusing primarily on size and traditional strength measures. The confrontation between Sergeant Maria Rodriguez and Colonel Henrik Volkov lasted mere seconds, but created changes that affected military institutions worldwide for decades. It proved that individual actions could influence broader cultural transformation when circumstances aligned with preparation, competence, and unwavering commitment to excellence under pressure.